Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and it's time for another new movie review. Today I'm going to review yet another documentary, and I wanted to do this today, even while my voice is still not 100%. Please bear with me through that, because I just got around to watching it finally, and wanted to talk about it while it's still fresh in my mind. A little bit later in the week, I'll be making an announcement about my documentary, The Midwest in Panels, about comic book stores all across the Midwest, and also about the trivia book. People have been asking me about that, and we'll be making that available to you very, very soon. But right now I want to talk about this. So Life Itself was released just after Roger Ebert died, I think in 2013, and it is in fact shows his final days and the days right after he passed away. There's very much a sense of finality with this film. You learn about Roger Ebert's whole life and what he was like before he met Gene Siskel, and Roger Ebert as a journalist before he became a film critic, and then what sort of a film critic he was both in newspaper and on television. You see both sides of the man. You get a lot of the negative stuff that nobody ever talks about. And it certainly doesn't paint a bleak picture of Roger Ebert, but rather humanizes him and makes him a real person and shows you his insecurities and what he was great at and what he wasn't so great at, both personally and professionally. I really enjoyed this film, and I want to talk about it for you for just a little bit. So this movie made me feel privileged to have been born in the Siskel and Ebert era of film criticism. One of the focuses of this movie very much is in Ebert as a brand, and certainly Siskel and Ebert together, but even Ebert himself, this powerhouse mainstream film critic who kind of broke through this mold because he had such an incredible gift for writing and this incredible eloquent way of putting words together that nobody could deny. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 1970 for film criticism. Nobody had ever done that before. I didn't realize he'd won it quite that early. And there's this really interesting study in the film, and there's a part of me that actually kind of wishes that we had time to explore it even further than we did, but it is really fascinating and well put together. This notion that Roger Ebert was this really sophisticated film critic who had this gift at getting at what a movie was really trying to do. He was really good at the analysis portion of it, and of course that's what I'm most interested in myself. And by the way, the reason I wrote this on my board is because Roger Ebert was a major influence for me growing up, and then getting into criticism myself. And I've always felt like I had similar sensibilities to Roger Ebert in how I approached narrative and approached critiquing narrative in films in particular. And anyway, so Roger Ebert was very sophisticated at that, but he was also a really mainstream film critic. So when he's on television, he's not doing analysis so much as this quick, truncated, do I like it or do I not like it thing, the thumbs up, thumbs down method. So while he was simultaneously elevating film criticism, he was also in a way part of the problem. He was also part of, and he has at times admitted to that and talked about it, and this weird double-edged sword where he wanted people to take movies on a case-by-case basis. He wanted movies to be things that didn't have to be for everyone. He wanted people to recognize in his reviews when they might like it, even when he didn't like it. And I think that's kind of the crux of his philosophy in film criticism, is that I'll tell you if I liked it, and I'll be passionate about it, and I'll tell you how I felt about it, but at the end of the day, you'll be able to tell, I know who this movie was made for, and if it's a good movie at what it's doing, then you'll know that you would like it even if I didn't. I was always surprised by his Twilight reviews because they're not super scathing, even though I really don't like them, and I still think that even for who those movies are intended for, they're somewhat problematic. But he recognized the audience for those films, and he could review them on that level, and that's something I always kind of admired him for. But the problem is, a lot of people didn't read Roger Ebert; they just watched him on television, and on television, it was the YouTube thing. It was the thumbs up, thumbs down thing. I don't think we would have the system we have on YouTube right now of thumbs up, thumbs down without Ebert and without Siskel and Ebert. I rather prefer the 5-star method where a thing doesn't have to be good or bad. It can be more complex than that. I liked it, but I didn't love it, so I give it 3 stars. Even here, this feeling it, not feeling it thing that we do here on this show, I allow these videos to go longer than maybe they should in that format, just so that I can do the, okay, I'm coming down on it with the green or the red, but in between, here's a little bit more detail. So even I have a really hard time allowing myself to make these so short that that I'm just going to straight up say yes or no, and that becomes kind of problematic in the culture of this idea that a thing must be either good or bad, and also that people that there's a right or a wrong answer, that people can't if Siskel or Ebert said it's good or it's bad, then sometimes people would feel like they had to pick one, and so anyway, that becomes kind of problematic in the culture. But if you read Roger Ebert, and nothing against his television show, because of course I absolutely loved it, and they would argue, and that's the whole point of having more than one person doing this. I sometimes actually cringe when I do these singular ones, because I like to have somebody else to argue with, so that yes, we're coming down on it, this is good or this is bad, but maybe I can argue with another person and we see another perspective to at the very least encourage people to have their own opinions. But if you actually read Roger Ebert, it's certainly more complicated than that. And the best thing about this movie is that it focuses heavily on Roger Ebert as a writer and and his incredible gift for words. The really endearing thing about Roger Ebert at the end of his life, and I liken him a little bit to Christopher Reeve, because both of them refused to let their illnesses deter them from living their lives. I almost said from doing what they love to do. Christopher Reeve less so, because he couldn't do of course, as much acting with the limitations that he had with his condition. But then you look at Smallville, and of course, he still found ways to do that once he was able to move again a little bit. But Roger Ebert, of course, had the fortune of his job being all about words. And he says in the documentary that he was living in words, that his life was about words well before he ever lost his jaw. And if you don't know anything about Roger Ebert, later in his life, he had a cancer in his face, in his jaw, where he had this condition where he ended up losing his jaw, and he had to be fed intravenously, and he wasn't able to speak. And the technology for voice like voice connected to typing got so good that they were able to take samplings of his voice from all of the video that he had been in, and they were able to, from his television show and everything, and they were able to make his voice synthesizer sound a little bit like his voice. And so later in the last couple of years, he would be able to type out something, and you'd actually be able to hear sort of his voice speak it. When they unveiled that on Oprah, I got to see that, and it was really cool. And that's in the film. So he is interviewed in the movie, and what's really neat is, in a way, at least for the sake of the piece, and of course it's really bittersweet to see Roger Ebert that way, because I loved his rhetoric, and I loved his passion and the way he would interact with people off the cuff, and he was very good at speaking from his heart and speaking without any being scripted, but his writing is so good. And so in a way, again, for the sake of the piece, I'm almost happier that we got all of his interview in writing, because people who maybe didn't read a lot of Siskel Ebert get to hear Siskel Ebert's writing, and that was his forte. That was what he was so good at. That's what I admired him most for. And I spent this whole movie jealous of his writing and wishing I could write that way, and I really like that his writing is so featured in that way. I should have looked this up ahead of time, but his someone is reading all of his written word answers to all of the interview questions, and whoever they got has a very similar cadence and way of speaking as he does, or is at least able to kind of mimic those vocal inflections, and it sounds really good, and it sounds a lot like Roger Ebert, and I think it's really cool that they were able to kind of make it sound like that. And sometimes you get to hear it in his voice synthesizer, and sometimes it's a man speaking. I'm pretty sure none of it is actually Roger Ebert from before he died, or I'm sorry, from before he lost his jaw, because I'm pretty sure it was all written more recently than that. And again, I wish I'd looked that up beforehand. I just thought of that. But like I said, the emphasis on his writing, I think, is probably the best part of it. Another thing that I thought was really interesting in looking at kind of this dichotomy of the more sophisticated critic and the more, maybe this is a bad word, but enlightened critic who's able to be thoughtful about things and take them on a case-by-case basis and not hold everything to the exact same standards. One of the things that's really interesting about that is, and I love that the movie touches on this, is the notion that it's very difficult to be objective at all and be a celebrity yourself and hobnob with the people whose works you're reviewing. How do you be friends with these people and still criticize their work? And I thought that there was some really cool, subtle stuff done with that, where there's some discussion about from some of the people who knew him and from directors and people of how impossible it is to not have bias and critique these people's work. And then they would show you a portion of a review where he was able to do precisely that. Martin Scorsese is interviewed extensively, and he talks about how he wouldn't have a career without Roger Ebert, how Ebert was reviewing films that weren't even widely released, that people that like the producers of the show and stuff didn't want him to review because not everybody could see them, but he insisted because he loved Martin Scorsese's movies so much. And yet, when one would come out, I forget which one it was one in like the mid-'80s, when one would come out that Roger Ebert didn't think was up to snuff, he was the most critical of them. He loved Martin Scorsese. They seemed to be friends, and yet he was able to put that aside and was maybe even more critical because of those expectations he had for his friend, because he cared so much about the man's career and loved his movies so much that he held him to even probably a higher standard than other people would. So even while he is gushing about the movies that he loves, and even though they're made by friends of his, he can say, yeah, that one's not up to snuff, and he's probably more critical of his friends than he would be of anybody else. There's this really cool scene, there's this really cool interview from Johnny Carson where he's talking right in front of Chevy Chase about how much he didn't like one of Chevy Chase's movies, and it was Three Amigos, I think. And Chevy Chase is right there, and Chevy Chase is like turning his head, and Roger Ebert is asked what his least favorite movie for Christmas right then is, and he says, well, I can't recommend Three Amigos, and Chevy Chase is right there, and it's really funny, but that was kind of the integrity of the man, and of course he wasn't perfect, and of course he made mistakes, and of course he said plenty of things that I and lots of other people wouldn't agree with, but I thought that was really interesting. The movie gets into his alcoholism and how he finally quit drinking really early in his career. Like I said, it gets into the negative aspects of Roger Ebert in both his personal and his professional life. It talks about how he wasn't natural in front of the camera and how he was too scholarly for television and how he had to learn how to write for TV. So even though he was such a great journalist and he knew how to write for print, he had no idea how to write for television. And he was really stuffy and he was really boring. And contrast that to Gene Siskel, who was an absolute natural on camera. The movie says that, and I agree with that. Anyway, I'm absolutely feeling it on this. I thought this was an absolutely fabulous movie. I was a little surprised that there was no discussion of Roper. I don't think Roper is even interviewed, or if he is, I don't remember it. The movie is structured. Excuse me. The movie is structured around the latter days of Ebert's life and his wife's struggles with coming to terms with Ebert's mortality and Ebert's fascinations with death. That was all really interesting, and why he feels that way, and talking about how his father died at an early age, and how he had already come to grips with the notion of dying, and all of that mortality stuff was, I thought, really fascinating, and of course super sad, and I really felt for his wife. But anyway, the structure of the film is, we get kind of the chronology of his final days, and then we through that we'll cut to kind of linearly his life professionally and personally, and I think it's a really good structure. Compare it to the George Takei documentary I reviewed a few weeks ago, which tried sort of a similar thing, but it kept cutting between subjects. It was like it kind of had three subjects, and it would like get to a point with one, and then it would jump to another, and then it would get to a point there, and it would jump back, and that seemed kind of jarring and kind of arbitrary. And this was not that way. So it's sort of non-linear in a way, but I certainly wouldn't have wanted like a full half an hour to be nothing but Ebert's final days, because he's so reflective about it that it makes a lot of sense to kind of jump back when we do, and it's a very logical kind of structure. But like I said, there are a couple of things that aren't really talked about a lot and that are kind of left out, and Roper was kind of the big one. I was surprised by that. Plenty of discussion about Siskel and Ebert's rivalry and ultimately their friendship and what they meant to each other. That was all very good. Certainly a lot of things that I knew, but it was nice to hear. Well, I was going to say Ebert talk about it, but it's actually more other people talking about it, and there were some things in there that I didn't know. One thing that I found perplexing is that all of the footage from at the movies from the television show looked like the same grainy, sometimes messed up, taped off TV quality that I've seen in a lot of YouTube videos. It seems like the internet was maybe their source for that stuff. And a few years ago, when At the Movies was still on and hosted by different hosts, there was an archive of nearly every show they ever made. And then at some point, funding was lost or something, and that went away, and none of that is viewable anymore. So the only way you can see At the Movies is people who taped it off TV and put it up on YouTube in poor quality. And I wondered why the movie makers weren't able to get their hands on that footage, because it clearly exists. Clearly it's not been destroyed. It's around somewhere. So I thought it was kind of sad that they couldn't get their hands on that. Martin Scorsese actually produced the film. I thought that was really cool and classy of him. Again, he clearly feels like Ebert made his career. But anyway, my voice is going, so I'm going to go ahead and quit now. But thanks everybody for watching. I sure appreciate it. If you've seen Life Itself, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the movie. And in the meantime, I'm Captain Logan, and I'll see you again very soon.